Hi, everyone. This is Marilyn Bradford, and I would like to welcome you to my Left Turn podcast. What is your left turn? Writing a blog, parenting in a different way, letting go of the old because you are aware of something greater. Left turns are choices we can all make. It's about a willingness to step into the unknown in any area of your life, to trust yourself, to risk creating or trying something new. It's about letting your true uniqueness shine. The greatest people who have lived, artists, statesmen, writers, explorers, musicians, have all been people willing to turn left. What capacities do you have that you have not acknowledged? What would your life and the world be like if you were willing to turn left? Hello, everyone. I'm Marilyn Bradford, and welcome to this edition of the Left Turn podcast. I have with me an amazing person who seems to almost spin because she has many left turns, and that is Ashlee Rose. She's a certified Access Consciousness Facilitator. But before that, she was a theater nurse, which I find just fascinating. So she worked with surgeons and all of that. And she had anxiety her whole life until she found Access Consciousness. And since then, everything's been absolutely 180 degrees, if not more different. So welcome, Ashlee. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here and to see where we can go. How many left turns?
Exactly. Well, let's just start out with what were some of the biggest left turns in your life?
It's interesting because I was sitting with this question that he'd sent me via email, and I was like, have I taken left turns? And I really sat with that and realized, like, how many left turns have we all taken that we've not acknowledged because we just be that difference, or we just assume that that's a normal thing to choose, and that everybody has the courage or the, audacity that we do. So I sat with that for a while and realized that probably the biggest left turn I've taken is out of my nursing career, my profession that
Right.
society or this culture tell you that, is for life,
Right.
and become a Access Consciousness Certified Facilitator and started traveling the world facilitating classes. And even sitting with that, I was like, is that actually a left turn?
It's
So
huge.
yeah, so I realized, like, wow, like, so how much I haven't even acknowledged my difference and how I function that is not like anybody else.
Right.
And so many people have asked me, like, how have I gone from nursing to, being a coach, because it seems like such a big choice. And I'm like, don't you just choose it? Like,
So what has acknowledging done for you? Because that's such an important thing, and I'm really glad you brought it up.
acknowledging has allowed me to literally actualize everything that I've ever asked for. And so many of us, like, this is the missing piece in actualization, like having something show up in physical form.
Mhm.
So many of us will ask for something or have an awareness of what we'd like, or, picture it or visualize it, and then not acknowledge, like, all the little things that are actually showing up for us. That is the universe, like, sending us all those breadcrumbs
Right.
before the actual, the full cake shows up, basically.
Right.
So what I realized about acknowledging is there is this, like, almost like law of physics that if you don't, and law of consciousness, that if you don't acknowledge, you cannot actually then actualize what it is you desire. So for me, acknowledging is like the key to having everything that I desire, and even just acknowledging that the universe has my back.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've noticed so many people still kind of have this point of view that they're wrong, or the universe is wrong, or the universe is malicious, or it must be because they did something wrong that the universe doesn't have their back, or the universe hasn't sent them X, Y, and Z. And I always say to people, like, what if first you acknowledge that the universe always has your back, that the
Wow.
universe is always there to support you, it is always there to contribute to you. And from that space, then what can you ask for, and then what is actually available to you.
That's so beautifully put. Thank you very much. So what other left turns have you had if you look back on your life? Or go
Um,
forward on your life. I like that one too.
yeah, well, recently, like I was talking about this with friends. In the last 6 months, and so many of us really in the last 6 months, have seemed to not be as enthusiastic about certain things that they were enthusiastic about, that were bringing them joy, and things that they thought that they would do for the rest of their life or for the foreseeable future is really changing at a rapid rate. So I guess for me, like the most recent left turn I've taken is really discovering more of myself, like what that actually looks like in my business, in facilitation, with what I actually desire to invite the world to. So again, I didn't really see that as a left turn, and then I really recognized, wow, a left turn is the willingness to actually choose what works for you. It's the willingness to really get that you are the valuable product no
Yeah,
matter what.
right.
And like that's different. So really the last 6 months I've sat with, okay, what would it take for me to truly recognize that I am the valuable product, no matter what is actually occurring around me, no matter what's going on with my business, no matter what people are choosing. And so I really have had the awareness that some of the biggest left turns I've taken recently, and with a lot of people that I've spoken to, is this willingness to now actually include themselves and choose for themselves, no matter what that looks like.
Well, how does that look to actually include yourself and choose for yourself? Because I do get that people don't do that. They're out
Yeah.
here, fixing others or doing this or that for others. Or so what is that like for you and how does it show up?
Well, it's interesting because growing up, we are constantly looking outside of us to the world around us to determine, usually and often, what we can and can't choose, what's possible, what's not possible. And that's where we grow up and have created this like reality or life that seems to have like this glass ceiling,
Yes.
on top of it, where we kind of can't go beyond potentially what our parents have created or chosen, or the people around us have created or chosen. And without recognizing, we are super psychic and super aware of other people's projections of us, other
Mhm.
people's beliefs about what's possible and what's not possible,
Mhm.
and then actually start to function as though that is our lens, that
Yeah.
is our reality.
Yeah.
What I recognized is so many of the choices we're constantly making are based on the other needs and desires and projections of people around us
Mhm.
rather than what's true for us.
Mhm.
And the interesting thing is, though, when you say, well, what's true for you, that question I still don't have total clarity on, because I get that's an ever evolving, beautiful
Yes,
discovery of you
absolutely.
the rest of your
Yeah.
life. But it really, for me, it starts with noticing that if the things that you're choosing or spending your time doing are not actually really bringing you joy or lighting you up
Yeah.
or something that you're really enthusiastic about, then you're probably in some way not actually choosing for you or not actually having your reality in that moment. So that's the beginning of really discovering what's true for you, is recognizing and actually being willing to be aware of the things that are actually not so fun, even if they're the things that you've decided you should be doing.
Right. Well, that should is a big thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
Can you get more specific about what you've actualized in your life? How it's so different now from when you were doing nursing?
Yeah, it's interesting because no one recognizes me now, who I used to be friends with 5 years ago. Um, when I was doing nursing, I struggled with anxiety and depression since the age of 2 or 3,
Wow.
really.
Wow.
They, like the doctors called it separation anxiety.
Mhm.
And I really struggled being away from my mom. I really struggled really up until I was 14 of even leaving her and actually going to school. I'd kick and scream when I was getting out of the car at school, and sometimes the school principal would have to drag me out of the car just to get me to go to school. And that didn't work because I would then constantly cry at school. So this kind of occurred until I was 14. And then I started noticing it show up again, really between 20 and 27, when I actually moved away from my mom, moved away from like what I decided was safety. And I lived in Melbourne where I studied nursing.
Mhm.
So I was, before taking my left turn and actually choosing to facilitate the tools of access consciousness, I was 20 kilos heavier. I had severe anxiety and depression. I struggled being away from my mom. And I always knew that creating something different and facilitating the world to greater consciousness was possible. I always desired to do that, but I didn't have that. I was just going to work as a nurse. Like, I had a wage. I traveled every few years. And then, since leaving nursing and really, again, acknowledging, and this was the choice that I made to leave nursing, it was just to acknowledge, okay, well, if I'm the source, if the universe always has my back, if
Mhm.
everything's actually possible, then why not this and why not me?
Mhm.
So
Wow, that's very cool.
that was my point of view. And I just quit my job, and I didn't even actually quit. I didn't even say to the manager I quit. I just never showed up again. And he never even contacted me. I was like, well, that was ease. That's what
Ashley's
happens.
gone on another planet.
She's doing some weird thing now. Like, we don't need to contact her. Um, so yeah, so many, like, that was the left turn that I took, but really my life looks completely different. I'm 20 kilos lighter than I was, like, just physically. I trust myself more than I ever have before. I used
Mhm.
to constantly doubt myself. I don't have anxiety. I don't have depression. I realized that that was just an ability to be in other people's realities and, you know, empathic, be aware of like what's going on around you. So yeah, and now I'm traveling the world facilitating people to greater consciousness. And I knew that that was always possible, but I
Right.
still have moments where I'm like, oh my God, I'm actually doing this. Like, am I qualified enough for this?
Apparently so.
Apparently so.
Well, I have a kind of an odd question, but I would really, okay, so I would love for you to talk about how your changes changed your relationship with your mother, because you talked a lot about, the separation anxiety, and you just didn't want to be away from her. And you seem so self-confident now that my sense is it probably changed a lot for you.
Yeah. I'm not even sure where to start with that. The Well, it's interesting because this is not something that we really talk about.
Exactly.
But with this whole idea of separation anxiety, which I recognized was the ability to be in other people's realities.
Mhm.
And I would encourage all of you that have been diagnosed with anxiety or call yourself anxious, like, what if it wasn't what you thought it was? And what if you're not wrong, first and foremost? What if you're aware of other people's realities and needs and other people's heads? And that can be overwhelming when we don't know what that is and we just call it something. What I've actually recognized quite recently is that I come into this world, this independent, confident 2-year-old, that I was functioning from communion with all things. Like, I grew up on a farm. I
Mm.
constantly saw the animals and the fairies, and I just had this sense of myself
Mhm.
that was unshakable.
Mhm.
And then, being so aware of everything going on around me, I started to look outside of me and at the world around me, including my mom, and was like, whoa, she's got a lot of stuff going on. Maybe she requires protection.
Oh my.
And this is only an awareness I had like literally in the last few weeks, and which is still unraveling, where I recognized it wasn't me that couldn't leave mum. I decided that I shouldn't leave mum based on, I'm okay, I got this, I can protect all of you, including all of my family, from this reality or like the insanity that goes on out in the world. So it's still unraveling, it's still changing, but just in the last few weeks, it's totally changed the way that I see my mum. And it's allowed me to have so much more allowance of her and gratitude of her, and then gratitude of me and allowance of me for an acknowledgement of me, for
Yes.
recognizing, wow, like what was my point of view about myself before the age of 2 that I've never been willing to acknowledge before? Because so many of us don't remember that, or so many of us don't sit with that. But I really wonder for like everyone listening, like what was your point of view about you before whatever occurred that kind of drew you away from you and into everything else?
Very nicely. But it sounds like a complete switch, really.
Yes. Yeah. Not what I expected.
No. You know, when we let go, it's almost never what we expected and generally much greater than we ever could have imagined.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's what it sounds like for you. When we were chatting before the show, you mentioned entities and awareness of them when you were a nurse, a theater nurse. And maybe you could tell people a little bit about what a theater nurse is and about the entities.
A theatre nurse is a nurse that works in the operating room, or the theatre that we call it in Australia, the operating theatre, where I'm assisting the surgeon to literally do the operations on everybody. So I would stand next to the surgeon and I'd be the one that would hand him the scalpel and then the scissors and, you know, whatever else he required. And I did that for 4 years after my training to become a nurse. And throughout my job, and particularly towards the end of my job, I started fainting a lot. I was constantly tired. I really struggled seeing anything. My eyes were always fuzzy. I always kind of had fuzziness in my head, headaches, wanted to sleep constantly, and multiple times fainted, like standing up, assisting in the operation.
Here.
And so many people said, you must be, you know, you must have chronic fatigue, you lack iron, you know, they started diagnosing me with all these kind of things. And it never really was very light for me. Like there was still something there that my gut was like, there's something else. And then I did my first Talk to the Entities class, which is a specialty class in Access Consciousness. And because I don't see entities, or ghosts, some people call it, because I don't hear them, or I didn't think I heard them at that time, I was like, it wasn't even in my reality. It wasn't even in my world. And through being introduced to these tools of Talk to the Entities and the capacity that actually all of us have with disembodied entities, I realized that they were all my entity signs and symptoms, my entity awareness. And entity awareness can show up either physically or psychologically. And psychologically, it can show up as anxiety, like schizophrenia, bipolar. Physically, it can show up in literally in any way, because the thing is, our body is this beautiful, conscious organism. And it's like this TV antenna that's constantly giving us and gifting us information about the world around us to contribute to more ease for us. And so when we ignore what we're aware of, that, and for me, it was entities, our body tries to let you know. So our body becomes more and more intense. Our body assumes that we would ask a question like, what are we aware of? But many of us don't.
Right.
And so it just becomes more and more and more intense. So, and you can get to the point where I facilitated many Talk to the Entity classes with people coming that have been diagnosed with all sorts of things. And after one Talk to the Entities class, that has completely dissolved and disappeared, because they took a left turn and were willing to acknowledge that they had a capacity with entities, as much as that, you know, scared them, worried them, like, you know, as much as they couldn't understand it, rather than keep, you know, taking the right turn of like, oh, well, there's something wrong with my body.
Right.
So it was massive for me to recognize that. And as soon as I did, and I had the tools of being able to communicate with them and clear them, and receive from them,
Mhm.
everything changed. I never fainted again.
Wow, that's amazing. And how does it show up for you now?
In exactly the same way. So like the sore eyes, the fatigue, or just the heaviness and the fogginess in my head. But as soon as that occurs, I know that there's something I haven't acknowledged. So it's still showing up in the same way. I just haven't got to the point of fainting because I don't actually ignore them for that long.
Right. Hello,
Yeah.
hello,
Yeah.
Ashlee.
Yeah. And
Talk to
it's
us.
yeah, exactly. And it's interesting because, I mean, particularly with, society and the movies, that ghosts and entities are portrayed as, bad and evil and terrible. And most people don't recognize there's so many disembodied entities that desire to contribute to us, that desire to gift us things, which is
Yes.
so not fathomable when like when I first come to the Talk to Entities class. What do you mean they desire to give me money? What do you mean they desire to contribute to my business? And so sometimes, again, there's many, many entities and spirits hanging around you that desire to gift to you, or you may have been asking for contribution. And so they flood into your space because they're like, well, we can contribute to you. And then your body starts having lots of things go on with it. And yeah, so sometimes, like, that's the way our body lets us know if we're ignoring it. So even if you have fatigue, or even if you have sore eyes like me, it doesn't mean that there's something that needs to be cleared or there's something evil or bad around. You always ask a question. But so
Yes.
often for me, they desire to gift me even just energies that would contribute the to contribute to my body.
Lovely. Very lovely. Thank you. So if you could say anything to everyone who's listening to this in the future about taking a left turn, whether it's the courage or how you know it's a left turn, what would you tell people?
I would say that acknowledge everything you ever desired is a done deal, that it's already there and it's already been created. Your ask is what creates whatever it is you desire. So be clear on what it is you desire. Be clear on what that left turn would be, because so many of us ignore it. So many of us go, oh, we can't do that because of X, Y, and Z. Acknowledge it. Even if you don't choose it, just acknowledge it. This is what I truly desire. And then also acknowledge that if you ask for it, it's already been created in the universe. It's a done deal. It exists energetically, just not physically right now. And if you acknowledge that it's a done deal, and you're willing to actually have the courage of being so different, then everything can change.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Ashlee. This has been really illuminating, and I very much appreciate you coming on the show.
You're so welcome. Thank you for having me, and thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you so much for joining this episode of Left Turn. I wonder what embracing left turns could create in your life. What magical possibilities might show up. Remember, when you choose left turns, you are joining a group of the most creative and brilliant people the world has ever known.